Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about the movie The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. Now, before I get into this, I should be clear that I'm not really much of a Tolkien person. I've seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy through a couple of times and I really enjoyed it, but I've never really read the books, so I'm not really super familiar with the story of The Hobbit or a lot of the lore of Middle Earth. I'm basically just going into this as a person watching a movie. So now, with that said, overall, this is a pretty good movie. It's really enjoyable. I had a lot of fun. There's some really great nods to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is really pretty much the gold standard of fantasy movies. There's some really wonderful action that happens, and there's plenty of nice, funny moments. There's a lot of things that are going on in this movie that are really good. But there's also some pretty noticeable flaws. And I'm gonna just kind of talk about all of that with you guys. So first of all, let's get in on the good stuff. First of all, this movie is just visually beautiful on so many levels. There's a lot of really nice CGI work. Obviously, CGI has had the time to make some significant improvements in the years since the original Lord of the Rings movies were made. The idea that apparently, from what I've read about this, they did use some computer tricks to take the years off the actors who would naturally have aged since those movies were made some years back. And honestly, it's flawless. When I was looking at like Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen, it's like they looked exactly like they did back in the day when the movies were originally made. I was just really, my mind was blown at how well that was done. And of course, the landscapes of Middle Earth, from the Shire to down into Goblin Town, down into Goblin Town. I get such a kick out of that. To the mountains, to Rivendell, everything just looks beautiful. This is, I think, a perfect example of how to use CGI properly. So many movies today, it's just everything is computer, 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 and that's certainly a necessity in some sort of stories, especially these really epic kind of films where you could just really not realistically do a lot of things without computers. But here, there's obviously an absolutely gorgeous level of polish, and that really makes all the difference in the world. And another thing is that there is a really good back and forth between the moods that are there are like some really funny scenes like at the beginning of the movie where the dwarves are kind of making Bilbo's life hell, to the really grim stuff like the dwarves losing their kingdom, the main orc guy, the Defiler. I'm really gonna be pretty light on the names of characters here because, as I said, I'm really not super familiar with the lore of this, and there are a lot of characters bouncing around whose names are only mentioned a couple of times. So I'm sorry, you're gonna have to just bear with me on that one. And yeah, so mood, really funny stuff, and of course, so many very very good actors in this movie. Of course, the whole thing rests on the shoulders of Martin Freeman. And I do like that somebody mentioned this is not the first time that he's been in a movie where his character has had crazy adventures show up on his doorstep while he's wearing a bathrobe. And if you kind of missed that, Martin Freeman was also in the film version of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as Arthur Dent, if I remember correctly. And well, that's not a bad movie. I will forever always choose the original BBC miniseries from the 80s on that story. But of course, he's also these days best known as being John Watson over on Sherlock, where he is, of course, absolutely phenomenal. There are just really no words for how much I love Sherlock. It's such a great show, and I do like the fact that he is not the only character from Sherlock who will be joining us before the storyline of this trilogy is over with. But that's another discussion for another day. Of course, there really doesn't need to be a whole lot said about Ian McKellen as Gandalf. He is, I mean, really, it is quite easily his most iconic role for really one of the greatest living British actors there is. I mean, come on, it's Ian McKellen. Actors do not get much better than him. I mean, there's a Sir in front of this guy's name for a reason. Let me see. Of course, we got Hugo Weaving back as Elrond, and he has a and to Christopher Lee and all those other folks, reprising roles and all this other stuff, all very enjoyable. I have to say though, I think out of everybody, I did say that they had used the computers well to sort of hide that the actors had not had would have of course aged. Hugo Weaving is the only one where I was a little on that one, but I might be being a little bit harsh on that because I recently saw some of the Matrix. That's of course his real breakout role, and obviously he was a much younger fella back then. So again, maybe my image of what Hugo Weaving should have looked like is a little bit off due to that. And let's see what else. Oh yeah. I cannot forget. Hang on one sec. Yep. Okay, I want to make sure I get this guy's name right. The Goblin King. When I was listening to him talk in the theater, I was like, oh man, I know that voice. I know it from somewhere. I just cannot think of who it is. So of course, when I got home, I did some poking around on Wikipedia and was able to find out that it was none other than Barry Humphries. You might not have heard of this fellow. He's an Australian comedian. Got a very, very long career, but he's actually best known for playing the character of Dame Edna. And I'm not going to go into a huge long spiel about what's going on there, but suffice to say, you see, that's a character I'm familiar with and have always found rather funny. So I got an enormous kick out of him, and his performance as the Goblin King, it was very short, very brief, but it was really, really funny, and I think. A dark horse moment or a dark horse performance for this film, it just really stood out to me as being really a guy taking a fairly small role and really, really running with it. And of course, you have to give some serious props to Andy Serkis as Gollum. He goes from being funny to being extraordinarily menacing, and it's all just so very subtle. And of course, so much hinges on this because one of the big things of both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is Bilbo's decision to show mercy to Gollum. Now, again, this is a big, big thing in the original trilogy of the movies. So, we really had to be sold that as creepy, as scary as Gollum is, and Bilbo ends up sparing him literally minutes after Gollum was talking about killing and eating him, after he'd seen Gollum beat a goblin to death while muttering about how he was going to eat him. That alone shows that Bilbo really is a good guy, and of course reinforces what Gandalf says about how it's the little acts that really hold evil at bay. Now, again, I could really go on and on. This movie has generally received some very good reviews, and honestly, I think that this movie definitely deserves them. It is, in many aspects, an absolutely fantastic film. There's wonderful actors everywhere. The story it has funny moments, it has scary moments, it has sad moments, it has some just beautiful action scenes. As great as the original trilogy was, I actually have to put some of the action scenes, especially the stuff down in Goblin Town, I think this really actually does top it. I mean, it's really just that good. But as I said, there are a few rather significant flaws in this film, and rather than just sort of retreading, the praise that people have justifiably put on this film, I want to briefly talk about my main gripes with here. And I'm not doing this to accentuate the negative. I'm just saying that I think that by pointing these things out, I can offer something a little bit different. Rather than just that was great, that was great, that was great. So with that said, let's get on with it. Now, the main one, and this is the one big criticism that I've seen a lot of people levy at the film, and it's one that I have to agree with, and that being that the first part of the movie is really pretty slow. Now, this is a long film, no doubt about it. But for the most part, once the story really got rolling, even though it was long, I didn't really mind so much. But, it is right. At the beginning, a lot of things have to be set up, a lot of information has to be dropped, and all this other stuff. And that's all well and good, but there, after a while, I was just like, for the love of God, can we just kind of get on with it? One of the strengths of the first movie in the Lord of the Rings trilogy is that Frodo doesn't spend a whole lot of time sitting around on his butt in the Shire, deciding to go off on his adventure. That we get to spend enough time to establish what's going on in the Shire, and then it's like, oh crap, Frodo, you need to get out of there. Here, it just really takes way too long. And I mean, the scene with the dwarves, screwing around in Bilbo's house, messing with him just for the fun of it was funny. It just all went on too long. You really have to wonder just how Bilbo's. Okay, I think I'm really just sort of running in circles here, but basically, yeah, that took too long, and they really did need to kick up the pace a notch there. Now, my other main problem with this movie is that, and this is if you're going to write a story or tell a story or offer up, solid criticism of a story, and by criticism I do not necessarily mean negative things. One of the things that you're going to have to look at is the simple question of who is the main character, or who are the main characters. And here, it's not really as clearly defined as it should be. Now, if you ask me, as somebody who isn't really very familiar with this, who is the main character of The Hobbit? Well, okay, based on my just sort of layman's knowledge, I would say, well, the main character of The Hobbit is Bilbo Baggins. And for the most part, I'd say that's correct. But, and this is the real big problem here, for a lot of the movie, Bilbo is just not really doing anything. It's not about him. It's not focused on him. Bilbo doesn't even do or say anything for a really, really big chunk of the film. Now, again, this is simply, part of it is the simple necessity of establishing a lot of things that are happening otherwhere, what's going on with the dwarves, what's going on with Radagast, and all this other stuff. And, alright, but still, if you don't have a main character, if it isn't really tightly focused, if it isn't anchored with somebody, then no matter what you're doing, you're really going to have a hard time keeping the story moving in a concrete way. Now, Peter Jackson and the folks, Guillermo del Toro and Philippa, oh geez, I forgot her name. Well, basically the folks that wrote the movie. Now, they genuinely do a pretty good job with this all, but still, it doesn't change the fact that there really isn't much of an anchor here. Now, I guess you could also say that, Gandalf is the second main character. Well, I won't disagree with you on that. I mean, whenever somebody needs to be rescued, well, certainly out of nowhere is going to pop up Gandalf. But again, even then, we do spend some time with Gandalf, especially when we're in Rivendell. But there are a lot of times when Gandalf is just one of the group, or he's not there, or whatever. Now, okay, you could just say, well, Oakenshield is also a main character. And again, you're right, but there are a lot of times when we're not with him, where he's just another one of the dwarves. So again, I think that the lack of a really strong main character, it really does work against this film. And if you want another example of a film that does have a large cast of characters, but is seriously hampered by a lack of a main character, well, the first one that would really jump to my mind is Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. Now, I realize that's a rather infamous company to put a film of this quality in with. All right, now make no mistake, The Hobbit is much, much better than The Phantom Menace will ever be, or will ever be. But still, they do share a similar flaw in that regard. Now, honestly, yeah, that is really my biggest complaint. Now, actually, since I brought him up, let's talk about Radagast the Brown. Now, this is actually one of the main things that I was really, really wanting to check out with this movie. And that is simply because he is, of course, played by Sylvester McCoy, who is best known for being the seventh Doctor on Doctor Who. And I've been watching Doctor Who since I was like 15. So the classic Doctors from the old Doctors Who's from like the 60s through the 80s, I'm reasonably familiar with them, and and a fan of all of them. Of course, with Tom Baker being my favorite. But McCoy is definitely up there as one of the best of the original series Doctors. And, apart from Doctor Who, this is really the only thing I've seen him in, at least that I can recall. So I was really excited to see what was going to be going on with him. And, of course, I do know that from a little bit of reading that I've done that Radagast has a much larger role in this story than he does in the books. And okay, I really don't have an opinion about that one way. And seeing as how I'm not really familiar with the books, I can't really criticize, how different he was or anything like that. I can say, though, that there are a few problems with Radagast as a character. And the main one is, well, half his head is covered in bird poop. Now, I was just sitting there watching that scene in Rivendell. Oh, by the way, there are going to be a bunch of spoilers, some minor spoilers for the movie in this review. I forgot to mention that at the start of things, but we're going to keep things fairly light. Well, anyway, we're Sauron is kind of giving his little speech about why the situation isn't really anything to get upset about. And part of it is like, oh, so Radagast the Brown told you all this stuff, huh, Gandalf? Well, tell me, did he was half his head still covered in bird shit like always? Well, you have to admit, having bird crap all over your face is not something that's really going to lend you credibility. And yeah, of course, there's also the jokes about drugs. Where apparently we get that scene where Radagast apparently gets high off of Gandalf's pipe, and Saruman makes a rather interesting comment about Radagast's fondness for weird mushrooms. I mean, again, all you're really doing there is further undercutting Radagast's credibility and putting references to drugs in what was supposed to be a movie based on a children's book. So yeah, I don't think that was the best choice they could have made there. But that said, we do still get to see the moments where that Radagast, for whatever his flaws might be, is definitely someone not to be taken lightly. We can see that he's obviously capable of dealing with evil. I mean, the dude takes on the freaking Witch King, and manages to get away. That's no small feat. And of course, we do get to see that wonderful moment where he's talking about dealing with the warg riders, and he's talking about his little sled of super bunnies, and he goes, "I'd like to see them try." And I gotta say, I got such a rush out of that moment because that was what I was waiting for. That was that glimpse of the Seventh Doctor that I was so hoping that I would get to see in this movie. And I guess McCoy was really saving that for a very defining moment, and it was totally worth it. Whatever complaints I have about Radagast, that moment just trumps everything. Now, honestly, let's come around to basically what is my other main complaint. And again, this is really not a flaw with the story in itself. This is just me coming into this film as a layman. Now, I know that there are going to be this is another movie trilogy, and there's of course obviously there's 2 more films in the day in the dock to come down. But when we finally get to the very end of the film, we can see the Lonely Mountain off in the distance that apparently the Eagles couldn't be asked to take the heroes to. Stupid Eagles. Anyway, the feeling I was left with at the end of the scene, which was a really nice the heroes have survived. Bilbo has proven his worth. He's been fully accepted by the dwarves, and all that. I just can't help but was sitting there thinking, like, okay, so obviously there's more stuff, but exactly how much stuff can possibly happen to this guys if they can freaking see where it is they have to go? Now, I'm sure there's plenty of stuff in The Hobbit that will more than fill up the next two movies. I have no doubt about that, even though I'm not really very familiar with that. But that's still just a feeling I was left with. And oh yeah, I almost forgot. This is another one of my really big gripes about the film and this kind of goes back to what I was saying about there not really being a main character. The little proto fellowship, and I'm sure there's an official name for these guys, but I'm not going to bother to look it up. Okay, there's basically 15 people here, and a lot of the dwarves, their names are only said once or twice, and there's just a lot of people. There's just a lot of people to keep track of. And while I'm sure everybody got name checked at some point in the movie, for me, as someone who's not really very familiar with this stuff, it ultimately just turned into dwarf with the bow, really fat dwarf, lawyer dwarf, those two dwarves, the dwarf with the slingshot, who I assume was the toy maker that Oakenshield mentioned. And while I got a kick out of the dwarves and a lot of their antics, and it was certainly fun seeing some of these guys really kick some butt, a lot of them were just very one-note characters. Now, now as the trilogy wears on and we get to know these guys a little bit more, I'm sure that'll help change. But it just the lack of character definition for those guys definitely, I would say, is something of a mark against this film. Also, I thought it was kind of convenient that nobody out of all these guys died or even seemed to get seriously hurt, despite everything that happened. I mean, Oakenshield kind of gets knocked around by the Defiler dude, but by the time the eagle drops him off, he seems to have recovered. So yeah, I think that's yeah. But anyway, at the end of the day, a lot of this movie's flaws are simply the fact that it has an enormous amount of things to set up, and it just can't fully devote all the time that it really truly should to certain aspects of the film. But again, this is a long movie, and you don't want people sitting in the theaters for 5 hours, so hard choices have to be made. And I'm sure when there's an inevitable extended direct cut or a director's cut or whatever you're going to call it, there's probably going to be a lot of stuff that pops up that really fleshes out some of these things and deals with some of these complaints. But I can only deal with what I saw in the theater a few hours ago. But at the end of the day, this is still an extremely enjoyable movie. There's so many talented actors. There's some really great action and funny moments, some gorgeous CGI. This is definitely easily going to be added into the pantheon of some of the best fantasy films ever made. I'm definitely looking forward to the next installment of this trilogy, and at the end of the day, this movie is totally and completely 100% worth your time. And with that said, folks, we're going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.